And I'm going to call this regular meeting, October meeting of the HPC to order. The first item on the agenda is the consent agenda, including the minutes from the September meeting, new historic district property owners, and administrative COAs for the period September 12th to October 15th. Is there a motion to accept the consent agenda?
I so move.
Second?
Second.
Approved? Say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. We have two items on our action agenda, and we have neither applicant present at the moment, but, so let's proceed to the item concerning the guidelines update. And Commissioner, you have some recommendations
I
on that?
do.
Okay.
We've spoken at several meetings about paint colors in relation, the trim color in relation to the body of the house. And this came up because of an administrative approval, and this is simply to clarify for their benefit. What I would like that to read is that the color of the body of the house determines the color of the trim. That for a light color house, the trim should be dark. For a dark color house, the trim should be light.
Well, do you need necessarily have to have a dark colored trim with a light colored body?
That's what the guidelines say currently,
Well, this is the what style house?
any style.
It's different, because Greek Revival would have light trim and a dark.
Yeah.
I guess it's the Queen Anne Folk Victorian that says trim and accents. Darker colors such as dark olive, salmon, red, and dark brown should have lighter colors. So it's just the Queen Anne Folk Victorian.
I don't know if you, I mean, do we want to make that mandatory? Is that what we're saying? Because, I mean, you still could have lighter trim that still could look good. I mean, I don't know.
There has to be contrast, though. I mean, we rode all around the city looking at Victorian houses, and the ones that are a light color house and there's not enough contrast with the trim, just, it defeats the purpose of the Victorian elements that you're trying to accent. And all light colored houses,
So this is.
see, they
for-
don't address a dark color house at all.
So what period are they saying now for Victorian?
Yes.
So this is just for Victorian?
I think you just got a sheet,
Oh.
but yeah, it's just for the Victorian. It's at the
Can't
bottom.
give it out as from the current guidelines.
Well, there are two overriding concepts at the beginning. Let's say, should be appropriate for the preservation of historic structures and should be in keeping with the architectural style of the building, which I think is the point you raised. It might be one thing for a late 19th century and something else for early 20th and something else entirely for early 19th century. More in keeping with historic styles of the era. Is that what you want to address?
Well, I thought she was saying it in general, so I didn't realize she was talking about the Queen Anne Victorian. I guess that is typical, which is what Kay is saying.
I mean, you can reword it any way you want. It's just a dark colored, a light colored house wasn't being addressed.
Well, what if we put typically,
That's fine.
you know, put typically.
I'm just
in
trying
there.
to make it easier
Well,
for our
yeah.
staff,
I
so
know.
every, house color doesn't have to come before us.
But I guess all I'm saying is that someone could come in here with a really nice combination of colors, and it might not quite meet these standards, so.
But that would be the exception, and that probably could come to us. But your general garden variety Victorian house.
Oh, is this to get?
If it's clearly light or dark,
Oh, you're saying for administrative approval?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's fine.
Would you read that again, what you were suggesting? And it was for the Queen Anne folk?
it is.
And I'm sorry, after we talked about it, I forgot precisely what you suggested.
What I was, we can word it any way we want, just for sake of argument. The color of the body of the house should determine the color of the trim. If it's a dark color house, it should have lighter trim. If it's a light color house, it should have darker trim.
And this is just for Queen Anne?
Yes.
I thought that some of the Queen Anne's often, if they had a light color, like light blue or peach or something, they would sometimes have a white trim on them.
They just don't, there's just not enough contrast. I mean, the key word in this is contrast.
I think if we put typical in there.
Yeah.
Typically having that, I think that would cover us, and if they want to go, so that's, what we're saying is that we would not necessarily not approve it. But if it's going beyond this, then I guess it would come to us and we take a look at it.
Plus, they can always bring examples of colors, from historic guidebooks, I imagine. If they, if they felt like they were a little different than what was being requested, they could bring examples of, other cities, other areas that would help.
Tom, do you want to check in on this at all? Do you have any?
As a matter of fact, I think,
feelings?
I think the house that's on the corner of Cabell and F Street, that Victorian, I think that has light trim. I think it's darker. Was that what you're saying? Darker with light trim? Did you
Yes.
just- Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's a dark house with light trim.
This is not hard.
Okay. I mean, I think just put typical in there. Typically, I think we're fine.
Okay.
Well, no, for staff, though, it goes a little bit further. If you look at, if we're talking about the Queen Anne and Folk Victorian, the current guidelines say these dwellings had a diversity of colors using contrast for the body and trim. Okay, body is tan, red, green, or brown. So that's pretty specific in colors. Tan, red, green, or brown. So if someone brought me a yellow Queen Victorian, it's not getting approved.
And that doesn't make sense to me.
Well, but that's what your guidelines say.
I know.
And that's what needs to be discussed.
That's why I think it's just, if we just put typically, these are the colors.
Yeah,
that
it
doesn't
gives them
mean
a
that we won't
wider
approve other
range.
colors.
But I think what you just raised is that specifically states tan, red, green, brown. Or, yeah, there's nothing in there about yellows, blues, and greens.
I think it's too specific. I've seen a wide variety of Queen Anne and the Folk Victorian. I've seen some, in all light colors, and it works. I think, the applicant could bring in alternates. Since this is administrative, I think that when you give it to the administration with such specific colors, it really limits people. And most people don't have, well, not most people, some people don't really think a lot, and they just say, oh, okay, I'll use what they say, and, they shouldn't be limited by that.
So should we just take out the colors altogether?
No, I think just adding the verbiage of typically, these colors, and then others will be considered if they provide proper contrast or something to that effect. Because that gets what you want is the contrast, which I think makes sense. Yeah.
Well, I think staff is telling us, though, that this is too restrictive, that we get applicants that are offering greens, yellows, blues, and then the question is that an appropriate color, are those appropriate colors for that period? And then the question is, what about the trim for a body of those colors? And then you can say dark green, dark blue, light blue, and it gets back to what you raised. So it's, I think we don't want to be so restrictive for
Right.
applicants or for staff.
Right. That's right. That's the point.
Yeah, we just don't want purple houses like on, is that Harrison or
next street over, Madison.
Madison.
Okay, where it states these dwellings have a diversity of colors using contrast for the body, would it not be acceptable just to say examples given, tan, red, green, brown? I mean, diversity could be, to me, that's red, that's real wide ranging,
You can just say such
So-
as.
or say, yeah, such
Yeah,
as,
that
exactly,
sounds good.
examples given. If the diversity of approved colors is much larger than the non-approved, then maybe we need to list those few colors that should not be.
Well, purple could be nice if it's the right purple.
Right, true.
Well, do we want to take this up next time?
No.
You want to
We've
rework it?
taken
You want to
this up
redo it?
Over and over and over again.
Well, okay, but
No,
I'm not hearing a consensus.
Well, let somebody
I agree
other than
with-
me state a sentence, like Chris or Rick.
What if
Chris,
we said something to the effect of, these dwellings typically have a contrast of color between the trim and body, with common colors for the body being X and common colors for the trim being Y?
Yeah.
Well, what are X and Y?
the ones that are
The current,
listed.
the current ones that are listed.
We've already said that's much too restrictive.
Okay, how about this?
Tan, red, green, and brown.
All right, how about this?
No blue, yellow, no?
No.
Pink.
These dwellings had a diversity of colors using contrasts for the body and trim.
Personally, I think that's good enough, and just end it right there.
Well, then you could put, for example, the
You
body,
may be right.
for example, body, tan, red, green, brown, and trim and accents, just put for example. So all you're giving is examples, you're not saying these are the colors.
I'm still troubled with that for the staff because, we haven't mentioned gray. That's very typical to use gray.
Right.
Or an off-white, or a white body.
Well, if I go to San Francisco, which probably has one of the greatest examples of Queen Anne-style houses, they have about, what Neil's saying, about 10 other colors that are used. So I just think that if we keep that first sentence and delete the suggestions, because very rarely are they tan, and very rarely are they red. So I just think we should get out of that. I think it's, as long as it says it's a contrast, and then if these folks look at a color example that makes them nervous, can't they bring it forward, say, listen, normally we can approve this, but this is a little bit different, we'd like to have another set of eyes on it. Is that,
Well, then that raises the question is what would they administratively approve? Because there's no colors in here for them to go by, correct?
Yeah, the last thing I want to do is be on the wrong side of the color
I know.
with the HBC. To me, the way it's written is very straightforward, logical. It says these colors will be used on this side, this type style house. If it's not in there, we're not approving it. Now, what I have done in the past is I've called one of the members that either that lives in the district or is familiar with, one of you, and got your advice on it. And if you guys say, yeah, that's okay, we'll go ahead and approve it, but colors are still very subjective.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you look at the house on Rivermont, not, what was it? Victoria Avenue. That was one we sent to you guys and you approved it. And we would have never have approved that color.
well, and
Actually, we didn't.
I just think that looking at this whole list of styles, this is the one section that has a huge diversity. So I just think listing 4 colors is ridiculous. And so if you say you're going to just approve those 4, that's too limiting for the applicant. And so I just think the diversity of colors and the contrast.
Well, it would be
Sums it up.
helpful, I'm sorry. It would be helpful is if you added some more colors that would be appropriate, and then put the language in that Ms. Butterfield is recommending about the dark body, light trim, and so forth. So if you could add some colors to it, that would be helpful. That'd be a good start.
But there's so many colors that they could be. I mean, it's just a ton of them.
Literally, there could be 30. And so I would feel better if we had a reference book that we could loan people that says, here are Queen Anne style folk Victorian, and we look over the book, see if it's okay. I mean, if that's, if someone wants to say, well, I'm using this color here, because I've seen light yellow with white trim, and if there's enough contrast, it works. And it's very traditional in Queen Anne and folk Victorian. And in folk Victorian, some of them are all white. You know, they're more like because folk Victorian, I assume, because you don't have it anywhere else, would be similar to a farmhouse Victorian, vernacular Victorian, because I don't see anywhere else that would fall in. There's no farmhouse or vernacular Victorians, and we have a ton of them in town. And those, you know, some of them were very straightforward with very little trim on them. I mean, I grew up in one of those, and it was gray with white trim, and then the next person painted it all white. So, that wasn't great, but I just think that we're gonna end up with 30 colors in here.
Can we leave the Victorian and Queen Anne to be approved by this committee? Since there's so many colors on those? Those have to go through the committee, the commission?
You could, that's entirely up to the commission. I think that's singling one style of house out though, and that's really not.
Well, I mean, we could put there, if there are more than 3 color combinations, which there usually are on those houses. I don't know, it's a tough one.
Yeah, I understand that it's difficult. I believe you sent me, I believe one of you sent me a book to purchase.
There is a good book, and it's on Victorian, it's on San Francisco houses, actually.
Oh, neat. Yeah.
But we don't have San Francisco painted ladies in
No,
Lynchburg.
we don't.
Never have.
But I think,
And if
Well,
somebody
we-
comes in and says, I want mine to look like this Haight Ashbury house,
But there is another one.
it's not appropriate for Lynchburg.
no, but there is another one that is for Victorian houses, which I just thought of.
But do any of us know what was done in 1880, color-wise? We really don't have a documentation of that. There's no photographic documentation. And so for us to say that they didn't do that in 1880, and I'm going to the house that's periwinkle with white trim. That was found. People were incredibly flamboyant at that time, and they would do colors like that. And so I was almost surprised that that homeowner got grief for that, because people did do some of that range, and none of us, there was no color photography, so there's no documentation that that's not typical Lynchburg. People, once the 1920s came, everyone started painting the Victorians like colonial revival, because they were embarrassed by the over-embellishment of the Victorians. So they toned them down, they took trim off, they did many things to colonialize the house and take away the actual nature of the house. And so I think the colors we're saying are typical of Lynchburg are actually things that happened in the 20s and onward. And so, the painted ladies, a lot of those people really documented what colors were in there by scraping and getting down, and then they've repeated those colors based on careful documentation of what existed in the 1880s.
And that's
So-
why you really can't just say, these are the colors. I mean, there could be a variety of colors. Could be all over the spectrum.
Yeah, that's the one style that could have, like you said, 3 or more colors.
Yeah.
How about if we say anything except orange? Could I do it?
Well, no, I had a house, I had a Queen Anne that was actually painted cream with orange trim, and it was actually quite nice.
But it's anything.
It wasn't in
Why don't we
Lynchburg.
table it?
All right, let's, now you want to table. I was going to move this to some
Well, I
conclusion.
mean, if we can't get a consensus.
No, I don't have a consensus, and I don't want to spend a lot more time on it. I think there are enough questions that have been raised.
Well,
And I think that I would suggest that the committee have a discussion with the staff that how we can most reasonably and easily make this work for applicants and staff. and for us.
Maybe,
All right.
maybe each commissioner writes his own recommendation, and the next meeting we'll pick the best one.
No. All right, it's resolved, we're going to table this, and the committee will review with staff, all right?
Okay.
Let's get back to our action agenda. The first item on the agenda is the request of Elizabeth and Michael Doucette to replace the existing deck at 2140 Rivermont Avenue. We don't have drawings. Is there someone here to represent the applicant? Please come forward, sir. For the record, state your name and address.
John Sosowski. I am a contractor in Lynchburg. I work on historic properties, and my address is 718 Commerce Street.
Okay. We have nothing to look at on this project, and so please explain what it is that you're asking.
Okay, basically, there's a deck there already. I think it was built about 10 years ago, and it's got like the plastic, I don't know the manufacturer, but it's like Trex decking, you know, it's gray, and they've got that on the deck and the handrail and so on and so forth. And it looks pretty bad. And then you can see the piers that are holding it up have a plastic shell that goes around them and that sort of thing. We're basically just going to go ahead and remove the existing and put back something that is more appropriate. We're going to make it all out of wood. The deck's going to be all wood, wood handrail, wood decking, so on and so forth, and just make it look like it ought to be there.
Are you saying the same size, the same footprint, the same?
There's going to be a little bit of difference. It's going to go all the way around the entire back of the building and finish at the end. So it'll have like a walkway that goes kind of around the back of it.
So that's going to
I can-
extend to the left?
Yes. Let's see if I can complicate things here. It'll end right there, so it'll come around like this.
What will the piers be made
I'll probably have them out of wood. I'll wrap them, just have them square without the plastic crap on it.
You mean wrapping like a 6x6?
No, I don't like doing that because 6x6 twist. What I do is I'll usually take either 3 2x6s or 3 2x8s, and I will actually laminate them together. The three of them are much more stable in conjunction with each other. They won't have a tendency to want to do this over time as they dry out. But then I'll go ahead and put a wrapping around it out of other treated and do it that way.
So your final dimension would be?
Probably 7.5 inches square.
Okay.
Treated wood.
Yes.
Okay.
Is this considered visible from the street? I drove by this morning, and because of that large bush, I couldn't, and also because the way cars were parked, I couldn't really see it. But, so my first question is, if it's not visible, then do we have a lot of say in it, or what's?
Very little of it is visible from the street.
Well, the guidelines do speak to that, and porches are preferable to decks. Decks are preferred on rear elevations, not visible from any street. And I think this falls in that category.
What we try to do is when we do these things, my decks are significantly different than what you will find from most other contractors. We go to a little more lengths to make it a little more stable. I'll usually get a stack of 2x10s, and there's actually one over there behind Mike's house right now. And we'll take the 2x10s and we put strips in between them, we band it together, and then we cover it, and we'll let it sit there for 2 or 3 months and let it dry out. Then we'll go ahead and take a saw and we'll slice the 2x10s down long ways So you'll end up getting 2 boards out approximately this size. So when you put it together, it doesn't shrink real bad on you. You don't get the big gaps between it like you normally see on a deck. So it actually looks more like a porch when it's all done.
Can someone recap what we're being asked to approve here?
I think we're trying to approve rebuilding of an existing deck, extending it with, I guess this is the,
Well, this is what I presented to Mike and Beth. Initially, I came up with kind of this design because it mimics the rail that's on the front porch. And I was gonna cut the little doodahs in it like they have on their front porch. But they didn't particularly like having their rails being this thick. So what I'll do is, it will be almost identical to this, but I'll go to a picket like this, which is similar to what they already have over there.
I think the guidelines state that the square pickets are what is suggested for
No more than
decks.
2 inches in width.
These, I believe, measure 1.125 square, something like that, so.
I will say as chair, it's difficult, not having drawings, not having a list of materials, and being given this information at the meeting and not having an opportunity to consider it beforehand. I'm always reluctant not to consider such applications, but I will leave it to my fellow commissioners if they feel they have enough information, or if they would like to predicate a decision on completed drawings submitted to staff. I don't want to delay the applicant. I know we're into the fall
Right.
months, good working time.
Yes,
And
sir.
I want the applicant to have his deck as soon as he can. This is not at all directed at that issue. I would like to hear from commissioners as to how they'd like to proceed with this.
well, I feel that because it is in the rear of the house, you really don't see it. I think his design, I assume that the picket's going to sit on the bottom rail like
Yes,
those are.
yeah.
I think it's an appropriate design. Your pickets are going to be how many inches on center?
I think by code, they have to be like 3 or 3.5 inches. You can't be able to get a 4-inch ball
Right,
between the
exactly.
pickets.
And I think the design is fine, and as long as it meets code, we can't see it. It would have been better to have a drawing, but in this particular instance, I think a lot of people on this board know John, and I think it'll be fine.
Could we ask for at least a plan drawing that could be an administrative thing, just because it sounds very straightforward, but in deference to neighbors all around and people at the park, just in case it was something totally different.
Sure, yeah.
I just think that would, because it wouldn't be fair for us to say, yeah, that's fine, and then find out it's a 20 by 20 addition that maybe is visible from the street. So that would keep it, so that what you're doing matches, the verbal presentation.
How much bigger percentage-wise you think it's going to be than what's there now, once you extend it? 20%, 25%?
Probably 25 to 30%, yeah, somewhere in there.
Okay.
I would like to have drawings on file since you're changing the
Okay.
footprint.
Okay,
I don't know that that necessarily needs to hold anything up, but
okay. Yeah.
we need something on file.
All right.
Okay, is there a motion to consider?
So moved.
Move what?
To consider.
To consider
Motion
what?
to consider the COA for approval.
I'll make a motion
Okay.
that it be approved once a plan is submitted and approved administratively.
Okay. Is there a second to that?
I'll second it.
Is there any other question or
I
discussion?
have one more question on the, I get the wrapped piers. What, how do they meet the ground? What's the detail
I
there?
think there's a footing of some sort up underneath there, but
With the top exposed, or is the wood just gonna die into the ground?
the wood will die into the ground. I'm not gonna have the footing showing anywhere, so.
And I just wanted to add a comment that I really appreciate that you tried to duplicate the front picket design, the flat with the cutouts. That is a great-looking design, very distinctive to that house. But I know a lot of homeowners don't like it because they can't see their kids play in the yard. So, but appreciate that you made the attempt to, integrate that, because it's a nice detail.
Well, our guidelines say you're not supposed to build it to look old.
But you can build it any way you want when it's not seen, if it's appropriate to the house. And to say that a house has a beautiful detail on the front and they're not allowed to duplicate it is very restrictive.
Well, one of the
Well,
things that we did, that there's a house directly across the street from that, Rachel, John Dedden's house. And they have the same kind of odd little doodah detail on their balustrade going around their porch. But we included it in the picket fence that went around there. And they and we have gotten lots and lots of comments, and good comments about it, and said it looks very, very nice.
And the way that this would still meet guidelines but not look old.
I think our guidelines are rather specific on what is appropriate and what is preferred in that regard. We have a motion that we approve the COA as it was presented to us here, including the 2x2 pickets
Okay.
and the extension. We have a motion, a second. Any other question or comment?
I have one more question. How high off the ground is that deck?
I think it's 5.5 feet, 5 feet, something like that.
And how is it stabilized laterally? There's no, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Since the pier is just a wood post.
Right. It's tied into the house, I think. I haven't pulled everything apart to take 100% good look at stuff, because we're gonna be discarding the decking anyway. And, once I
that would
get
be the
into the
only
nuts
thing.
and bolts of the engineering of it, then, because typically what I find is a lot of other people that attach decks to houses do a really awful job of flashing them in. So, we will probably have to rework the attachment system along with doing all of this, so.
Are you thinking there may be a need for diagonal?
Well, if it was a brick pier, which would be my preference, a brick pier can be made stable, like a flagpole. But with a
Well, typically,
wood pier.
what we will do is, we will lace our pier system into our handrail too. So it's like one continuous unit all the way down. And then we'll put in blocking behind it that keeps it from wanting to move.
and it sits on top of the footing, it's not embedded in the footing.
No, but I'll usually bolt it down to the footing somehow or another, either with like a stainless steel clip or something along those lines. But I guarantee you can get half a dozen Madison Heights girls up there without any trouble at all, so,
But you will include the height and the dimensions in your drawing?
yes, ma'am.
Well,
All
isn't there a
right.
permit that happens anyway? Don't
Yeah,
you
I
have to
gotta go
apply
pull
for a building
for-
permit?
Yeah. I gotta
Okay,
go.
so the building
Yeah,
permit will
they have to
review
have
that.
Do you
Address
want,
the lateral switch.
do you
Yeah, they should.
want me just to include the drawing with the permit, or do you all want me to submit a drawing specifically to the HPC?
I think specifically to
Okay.
the HPC.
Okay.
All right. Any other discussion, question? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote. Those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, sir, you may go to work.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
The next item on the agenda is a request of James Maynard for an after-the-fact certificate of appropriateness to allow the use of vinyl handrails and privacy screening on the rear second-story deck at 1014 Harrison Street. Mr. Maynard, will you come forward? And for the record, state your name and address.
It's Jim Maynard, 1014 Harrison Street.
All right. We approved of this project. I'm not sure exactly when that was, whether it was just last month or the month before, but you made some alterations to what was approved. Would you like to comment on that? Explain that to us, please.
I would, yes. First of all, the deck is in the rear of the house. It's small, it's a 7x14. And we originally were going to put the rails and pickets on both the long side and the short side. However, we've had a lot of issues with some neighbors that have moved in renting the house next door with no curtains on the windows. And there's been a lot of issues that we've had to get law enforcement involved with. And so on that second-story deck, which is directly across from a window next door, a few feet away, we decided to put 2 privacy panels in as opposed to the rails and the pickets, which has worked out great. At least we're able to use the deck with some sort of privacy there. And also, I did purchase the rails and the pickets for that 7-foot section, which I have below. We can easily remove the 2 privacy panels if we had to, or someone had to. As long as we've got issues with people next door, we'd like to keep those 2 privacy panels in place, since it is on the rear of the house.
Okay. Is there a reason you use the vinyl handrails?
Well, it's
When-
something that I believe,
Excuse me, I believe what was approved, and I believe what you submitted was composite material.
yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's correct. What was the question then?
Why you didn't use composite material?
Well, we used the composite material on the decking, as we talked about before, and we used the PVC on the rails and the pickets. The composite material railings were not available to us through any of the normal sources that we had. I did check on that, so it wasn't something that was available. But we did use the square pickets as we discussed before, as opposed to something more decorative like was on the front of the house. And the fact that it's on the rear of the house, not visible from the street, that's why we did that.
This can be removed without altering the house?
Absolutely.
Are there any questions, or is there a motion?
My only comment would be that from the distance of the street, I don't think a person would be able to tell the difference between the composite or the vinyl. So if this had been presented with the original application, I think that, that probably would have been suitable because it's so far away from the street. And I think that the privacy issue is such an important aspect to many of the people in the historic district that this is a fairly good example of making the scale not look too bad. It's not like a big 4x8 sheet of plywood. It has the horizontal rails that help break it down a little bit. So, given the need for privacy and the lack of being able to see it from the street, it seems appropriate.
Would you like to make a motion?
Sure. I move to approve the 2 privacy panels in lieu of pickets, with the provision that the owner will retain the pickets, in basement or shed if someone wants to change it down the road, and that the vinyl be approved as an exception to the originally proposed composite railing.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
All right. Any other question or discussion?
I have a question. Is that painted right now, or is that just the raw vinyl?
It's the raw vinyl. It comes bright white like that, so you don't have to paint it.
So your intention is to leave it that color?
I do, yes.
And is the trim on the house, from this picture, the trim on the house looks looks creamier than that?
It is, it's a little creamier. It's got a little cream color in it, but it's a nice contrast. I sent in another photograph too, I don't know if you have it, but it shows the contrast from the other angle, which,
I didn't see any other one.
there were two photographs I submitted. It's not there yet, but anyway. I also had, all of the raw wood that was there, as you can see even from this photograph. The 4x4s are wrapped in a white aluminum material to cover all that ugly wood that we had to put up for support, but it looks very nice.
So the bottom is also vinyl?
It's an
post.
aluminum wrap. It's a white aluminum. It's already, got the color in it, but it matches the rails and the pickets and the color. It's a nice contrast.
Any other question?
In the future, if this situation happens again, that we approve something for you and you change it, would you do us the courtesy of coming back to us and letting us reapprove the idea?
I'll certainly consider that, yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right. We have a motion, second, we've discussed it. I'll call for a vote. Those in favor of the motion, aye?
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
All right, sir.
Thank you.
All right, let me get back to my agenda. And I think we've covered all the items. We had the two action items we've already talked about, the guidelines update and the paint colors.
We didn't, we still have one guideline update.
Yes, there was one other matter in terms of guideline amendments.
Right.
Okay, please.
And this, please let this be quick. One of my, just the background, one of my neighbors has a gravel driveway. And it's on a hill, and the gravel, every time she drives, the gravel migrates. And she wondered what she could do to make the surface more stable. Well, under the historic driveway guidelines, it says the materials are brick, concrete, or gravel. The city will fine you if you use non-porous surfacing. And it doesn't really seem fair to penalize people if they're just trying to fix their driveway. What I would like to add to brick and concrete are permeable pavers, just so if this comes to staff, it can be approved administratively.
Gravel's not permeable, though. A gravel drive is considered an impervious surface.
Right, that's the point.
She's
that
adding the.
She's being penalized for having that.
How is gravel not permeable?
I don't know.
It's because it's at least 6 to 8 inches, the water runs off. So it's considered impervious instead of pervious.
Big gravel, that's what you use for like a French drain because
No,
it's,
Tom
because it is
said-
permeable.
Tom said
But it's
that
not
too, that
compacted.
it's considered impervious.
Oh, that makes no sense.
Well, what
to
is
me.
being proposed is that we add to that
Right,
list of
just
approved
add-
materials a permeable.
Paver.
Paver.
Right.
And in fact, we have approved that before. There's one in particular on Diamond Hill I'm aware of where we did approve that. That was several years ago.
Do you know what building it was in?
No, I don't recall. I believe it backs onto, no, I'm not certain now. I was going to say Pearl, but I'm not certain. So, your recommendation is to add to the list of approved driveway materials this permeable paver.
Yes.
All right. Is everybody clear on that?
Well, does everyone know precisely what this looks like and the manufacturers? Because I think that before we add it to the list, we should know what manufacturers, there are some that are very modern, and so we just want to make sure that if
I
we're,
think we have to approve them. That would come before us.
It still has to be approved administratively.
Yeah.
but if we say we allow permeable pavers, then we say, but we don't like yours, I would, as a homeowner, I would be very upset by that, because some people go, not that they should, but they go ahead and they order things, because it says, if it says in the guidelines, permeable pavers, so at least we would want to say permeable pavers subject to, approval of manufacturer and style. Because we've used a lot of them and they're great, but some of them are incredibly modern looking and would be very out of keeping. And I think we'd have a lot of unhappy neighbors on our hand, especially to the extent that they might be used. They really, someone could go into, just as an example, go into Point of Honor and say, well, permeable pavers are allowed, and then it totally takes away from the landscape. Or the latest applicant that came before us with the landscape plan. I think we would be able to allow something like that at a distance, but right up to the street, it could be incredibly out of keeping with the historic context, so. I just think we should either look into pavers that we think are acceptable, and that everyone on this committee looks at them and says, yeah, that's great, we think that's, because the range is huge, there's a big range.
How about adding specific types of permeable pavers? Here we go again.
Well, I think, yeah, it would make sense to give at least a few examples, because grass pave is considered a permeable paver, and grass pave looks really unattractive unless it's kept up. So, and it's mostly plastic, black plastic with gravel. You can either grow grass or you can put gravel in between, and then you see the black plastic. I just don't want us to put something in there and have everyone shocked that we approved certain things, that.
Would you like to make a list of pavers that you feel are appropriate? We'll
If I can
table this.
find some.
Well,
I've got photos of some that were used in a historic district. I can bring that, and then you folks can look at that and see if you think it's appropriate. It was done on in a historic church in St. Michael's, Maryland. And because of a coverage. And on the church, I think it was appropriate. And so I think if you look at it and say that looks good to us, then that's fine. I just don't want people being shocked, because there's some that I think you would not want to see in your neighbor's drive. So we can also show some examples of this, not that. I think that's a great way for people to understand what to use. Use this, but not that.
Well, again, so how do we do this? Do we name all the ones that we're going to approve and all, how do you do that?
Say similar to the
Why
photo
can't we
A.
just say specific types of pavers? And that way it comes to the committee and we either say, yes, that is appropriate, or yes, no, it isn't.
We have in other areas of the guidelines, examples, photographic examples.
We do.
Yes, yes, this, no,
No, that.
this.
Right.
And so it's not a departure from what we've been
Yeah,
doing
it's
and
consistent.
what we've done in other areas, so I
I
think
don't know that we need
if,
every one,
uh,
we just need a good example.
I
Yeah,
think
one or
if
two.
Commissioner Deanich is willing to put together,
Like 2 photographs, just to give some examples to people. That would probably be a good idea.
And so
And
then,
you've done that in other,
and
Yeah.
then we need to, next to that, say not, appropriate, one that wouldn't be appropriate,
Right.
perhaps.
yeah.
Okay.
So you gotta find a modern one too, one that
So
wouldn't.
if you will prepare that,
Yeah,
maybe we
I
table
can bring that
this.
to the next meeting, because
And-
I think that way no one's shocked that oopsie.
Well, it just seems unfair, though, to have
So
the
we
only
have those-
options are the ones that they're going to get
We
fined if
will
they
have those
use.
two matters to take up at the next meeting?
Yes.
4 minutes, all right. I believe that concludes our agenda. Is there any other business to be brought before the commission? Our next meeting is November 17th.
Is it really, Robin, excuse me, is it really the 17th? Because that's a Tuesday.
That's a Tuesday.
It said the 17th on the agenda? Oh, I'm sorry, that's probably just a typo. Yeah, so what's the third Monday?
16.
It's the 16th.
Because
16th,
sometimes like the
all right.
room is being used
Yeah,
or.
no,
Yeah.
that was just a typo this time. It'll be the 16th,
16th.
sorry.
All right, thank you for clarifying that.
And, oh, I just wanted to say, because Ann's, and I'm gonna throw you under the bus. Ann is one of our stormwater reviewers. I don't think they're getting fined. Everyone has a stormwater fee on their bill. So if she's thinking that that is a fine, I mean, every homeowner has a stormwater fee on their bill now.
But
Yeah,
didn't
the smaller
they,
the surface, the less your
Right.
stormwater bill is.
Based
So
on
if you
the
have a
Oh,
larger
okay, I
enclosed
got
surface,
you,
have a
I got
higher
you.
stormwater bill.
Yeah, you would have less
right,
pervious area, I understand.
But she does have, yeah, she has an existing amount that is with the gravel. So it's not getting
but I would
worse.
rather steer her into something that she would get a discount on than keep her paying
All right.
more than she
Well, you
needs
like
to.
Hermie, okay.
Hearing no other business, I'll declare the meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Oh, so
I can remember Jeff
we had to
Schneider
deal with that.
making the motion
See,
to tell that.
They were really